Hey everyone, welcome back to Workshop Quick Takes. Thanks for joining us again today. Back on the 2000 Jeep Cherokee XJ, and we're going to take a look at fender flares. Now when I got this Jeep, a previous owner had already cut the fenders, so I didn't have a choice about that. And the owner right before me decided to try and put these on here to help out with that, because one of the problems with cutting fenders is you don't have anything to guard the mud. Some states you might want to wheel in require your tire to be fully covered by the fender or protrusion. Also, the sheet metal up here is pretty thin. Normally the fender itself has a little lip around it and then also a reinforcing bracket that holds on the factory flare, and that gives some of the structural rigidity to it. So adding something like this does help with reinforcing the fender and can make it legal for more roads and trails than it otherwise would be. These here are a bushwhacker style. I don't know for sure what the brand was on these, just that they're the pocket plastic. Now the kit that these were came with these screws here. They're self-tappers, so you just drill holes in the steel and then install the fender on top of them. There's a couple problems with that. One of them, of course, is that, again, the sheet metal up here is pretty thin. So when you tap these in there, it worked great at first, but you do much wheeling or whatever, everything flexes a little bit, and they start to work loose pretty quickly, which is not desirable. Second problem with them, at some point after the 97 to 01 redesign, Jeep, Chrysler, whatever, moved the windshield washer fluid reservoir from under the hood, where it takes up a lot of space it doesn't need to, into the front left fender where there's a big unused void. And a lot of modern vehicles do that, so nothing wrong with that at all, unless you go drilling willy-nilly into there without paying attention to what's going on. So yeah, looking up in here, you can actually see the washer fluid reservoir. It comes to about right here, which means any screws drilled in from about this point down the front of the arch are potentially going to hit that. And that's exactly what happened to the previous owner. So I ended up taking this apart and replacing the windshield washer fluid reservoir. It was pretty funny. You could actually see some silicone dribble down the side where they desperately tried to just plug those holes, and it didn't work. In the short term, I reinstalled it just by cutting off the affected screws like this, but I knew I needed to do something different. So if you look closely at the screws that are all in here now, it should be obvious that these are no longer the same self-tappers. There's something else going on here. What these are is I went ahead and put Riv-nuts in here and then added this stainless steel hardware, which hopefully won't corrode and rust and look funny. These were also stainless steel, of course, but again, wrong application. So how to go about doing that? It was pretty straightforward. Let's just do a quick walkthrough today so you can see that process. And then there's one other thing that we need to add in order to get this thing more or less 50 state legal. That is these little mud flaps down here. There's two reasons to have these in my experience. One of them is the simple unfortunate fact that when the wheel sticks out like this because it is on a spacer, or some of you might just prefer high offset wheels mounted directly to the hub, but either way, it's now kicking dirt up past this wheel arch from right here to here and spraying it under the door handle, which is not really pleasant during the winter or in muddy conditions. This here is not a perfect solution. It doesn't stop everything, but it at least calms it down a bit. However, there's a second thing it does. At some point, I'm hoping to get this vehicle over to Moab and do some wheeling, but Moab is in the state of Utah. And if you know anybody in the state of Utah, you probably have heard at least one or two stories about somebody getting pulled over and cited for needing mud flaps. Why? Well, reading the Utah Highway Code, as near as I can tell, the center line of the wheel must be protected by either the body, the fender arch, or a mud flap. Now this vehicle is lifted slightly and it is on 31 by 10.5s, which isn't much compared to what's going on with a lot of rigs out there, but it does put the center line of the wheel slightly below that. So by putting these on the fender flares, I should be technically within compliance, even though they don't look like a lot. Now there is one other thing I did, since a previous owner, probably the one who did the fender cuts, had thrown out the internal wheel liners. I went ahead and bought a black plastic trash can at Home Depot and custom cut my own just to fill up to about here. And the reason for doing that is if you don't have any kind of liner in here at all, the tire spray fills up this section of the fender and then the door with mud and debris, which is not pleasant at all. So just getting a little bit of one in here solves that problem. Doesn't need to line the whole thing, however. Up here, it'll just wash out. But let's jump into it now and just take a quick look at everything that went into getting this all cleaned up. Okay, these here represent a good starting point for working with rivet nuts, riv nuts, insert nuts, whatever you want to call them. I'd strongly recommend that while you can certainly use drill bits to start your holes, when you finish them, it's really helpful to have a stepper bit just because it creates a much cleaner, neater hole edge. You can get the cheapies from Harbor Freight and just burn through them, but I like to use these when I want a reasonable amount of precision and then just use the cheap Harbor Freight ones when I want to blow through a couple on a job that I know is going to destroy them. But you can always use the drill bits to get your hole started. Just make sure that you use a real small one as your tap hole and then at least one intermediate size before finishing the hole, and you can finish the hole with these and usually get pretty good results. This here is a kit for doing rivet insert nuts. This came off of, I think I got it from Amazon, maybe eBay. I have no idea what a Giantisson is, but you can also get kits from Harbor Freight. This one here is the style that uses the thing like this. So it kind of looks like a bolt cutters or really heavy duty pruning shears, whatever. There's another style that works this way. I would actually recommend that if you are doing smaller sizes like 632, 832, M4, M5, that kind of thing, use the handheld one like this simply because it can't apply as much force, and that's actually good. Even on some of the larger size Riv-nuts, I've completely stripped out the threads by accident using this one just because it can put so much compression on it that if you think you're just getting it really good and set, you can actually start popping the threads out instead. Now you've got to drill it out and do another one. But this one, however, will work. Just don't get carried away with it. You're going to need a selection of rivet nuts in the sizes that you want to work with. And likewise, your tool will need to come with a set of interchangeable dies. The way this works is this top piece here unscrews. The center one here has a release on it like this, and then you can unscrew it. Other tools may differ in how they work, but then you can select the size you want. So let's suppose I want to work with a fairly big one like 5/16. So that comes out with two pieces. These go in place of where the other one was. So first I have to push that down, screw that in until it lines up with the snap. Now that's locked in place. And then this here you actually use to set depth. So I'm going to start by getting this on here, screwing it into the head of the chuck, and then to set the amount of depth I can do on a stroke, I simply adjust this up or down and then hit the lock collar. To operate this, you need to drill a hole that is the same size as the diameter of the outer barrel of your nut. So this here is a 5/16 diameter inside. The outside is going to be a bit bigger. I did this with the stepper bit. And that there has a little bit of tension on it. It could be a little tighter. It'd be nice if it was, but this here should make a fairly good rivet. So I'm going to put this up here, and the way that works is now that that's in there, I screw this into there. You want to make sure that you're pressing gently up against the surface so that there's no slack on there, and then here's what's happening. You can unscrew it. So that is a rivet insert nut. Now this here should form a really tight connection. It shouldn't want to spin because of the compression between the two surfaces in addition to those little ribs. However, if you over drill your hole, it probably will. So make sure that the hole that you're trying to put the nut into is not larger than the nut barrel. And if it is, you might need to step up to the next larger size and make sure you match the hardware that's going in here. Here's one I did previously. So now I've got two side by side, a fairly small one, a fairly large one. They both work the exact same way. To keep the bare steel edge from rusting out around the rivet insert, you'll probably want to finish it with something. A bit of paint would do the trick. We used a little silicone sealant, and even a bit of JB Weld epoxy might help. Work with what you've got. Additionally, if you have cut fenders on your vehicle and nobody ever sealed the exposed edges, this is also a good time to tackle that job. For the fronts, brushed Rust-Oleum paint should do the trick. The rear fenders use the same procedure, but there's a couple other ways to get in trouble back here. First, the type of flare we're installing attaches to the wheel arch and the rear door as two pieces. For the fender piece, the screw holes drill through into a void space behind the cargo compartment trim panels. That means any metal filings that fall inside are dropping down into a pocket where they could promote corrosion. If that might be a problem, you'll want to think about getting inside that area with a vacuum cleaner. Or, if you have previously installed any new wiring or accessories back there, make sure you're not about to tear into any of them. The door has a similar issue, although it can be flushed out through the lower drain holes. And one of the rib nuts may come through just outside the door through the lip next to the weather seal. In both cases, be mindful of the door internals and the weather seal, when marking and drilling the mounts. If you follow any of the popular Jeep channels, they all say to cut the rear fenders like this, because the process compromises a structural seam. Unless you have means to weld and refinish the cut lip, these folds make sure the fender steel doesn't pop away from the wheel tub. But what we see here is a mud trap that will start a fast and fatal rust process. So, after washing and drying this mess, we went with a two-step process to permanently seal it. Step 1 was flooding the channels with black Rust-Oleum paint on a brush. Step 2 was to buy a couple tubes of seam sealer and burn up an entire tube on each fender to fill and cover the full inner lip. The inner tubs were then given a light spray with truck bed liner. And to be clear, if you're going to do this, use truck bed liner and not rubberized undercoating. The difference is that when truck bed liner fails, it flakes off like paint. When rubberized undercoating fails, it can form bubbles that trap moisture and contaminants and cause accelerated corrosion, which was probably opposite from your intentions. Your best bet for custom fitting the front wheel well liners is to reuse the OE ones after modifications so that they can fit the revised front wheel arch structure. But if the OE liners are breaking up from age or just missing, another option is a large plastic trash can from your local hardware or home improvement store. It comes in a convenient circular shape, and it's probably made from a very workable thermoplastic. Some cutting, trimming, and plastic welding will be required to get the fitment to meet your needs. There's no exact way to do this. Multiple test fittings and tweakings will be required, and if the plastic is too cumbersome, you might try test fitting with a large piece of cardboard or tag board, then use that as a cutting pattern. We decided to connect everything together using plastic snap rivets. These do fail once in a while as things flex and bump on the trail, but that's actually a good thing here. The snap rivets act like mechanical fuses to prevent excessive stress from tearing up the liner or the fender, which is where the damage would go if all this were assembled with steel screws and speed nuts. In spite of all that was previously done to this Jeep, we were pleased to find that the previous owner had modified the OE corner caps and their brackets so that they somewhat transitioned the stock trim pieces into the aftermarket flares. We made additional improvements and continued to use those pieces. Many fender cutters and bumper modders tend to lose the corner caps as soon as possible, especially on the less iconic 97-01 models, but we prefer to keep some of the OE look. And for what it's worth, a year after buying the vehicle, we were backing awkwardly around a trail obstruction, and the left rear corner cap took a mild crinkle when the XJ hit a low rock that wasn't visible in the mirrors. If the cap had not been installed, there would have been steel damage. This here is a rubberized vinyl, I think, base trim, commonly used in commercial establishments where you don't want to put in a high quality baseboard because it'll just get torn to bits. But what happens if I flip it over and put it underneath the plastic arch like that maybe? Okay, the bottom side of this here, I have a decent amount of space available. I'm going to mark it so I trim it to shape, and then once I cut out the first one, I'll just flip it over and I'll have the one for the second side. And then just bring it back kind of like that, you know, have a little trim piece on there. And hey, if I don't like it, I'll just throw it away and cut out another one. But let's give that a shot. Don't want to get carried away on this step, of course, but it is a way to just kind of seal off the edge so it doesn't start chipping or peeling back from the cut line you made. Okay, so put it on like that. Let's go ahead and mark where the first hole is going to be. Holes that I need to tap are going to be somewhere right around there. And then I'm going to mark that first one there and come back and drill the second one after I work out its position. Okay, so these holes need to be 3/8 and not a tiny bit more, because as you can see by this first one I've drilled out here, this here needs to fit through fairly tightly. So let's go ahead and get the second one where I marked it over here. Now that I've worked out one of these, I'm going to do the same thing for the right hand side, except this time I'm just going to flip it over so that I've got them exactly back to back, and then trace the same thing. I kind of like that. So I'm going to go ahead and mark the second one up here. Yeah. Okay, if all goes well, that is all there is to it. I'm hoping I really don't need to drill a third position on there, though. It almost feels like I should do 2 out here. I don't know if that's wise. Well, I'm gonna go with my instinct on that one. Yeah. So we'll see how that holds up. Finally, this might sound trite, but don't forget why you're doing all this work. It is God's beautiful world out there, and some of it is only accessible to vehicles with off-road capability. Now that the job is done, get outside and play. Hey everyone, thanks for joining us again today. That was another episode of Workshop Quick Takes. One thing we didn't cover, but you'll want to pay attention to it if you've got fender flares like that, is those plastic pockets do trap mud and silt behind them sometimes, especially during the winter when you've got salt and snow conditions, or if you've been mudding or splashing around in silty water. So you'll want to take a garden hose now and then when you do your cleaning and kind of get back up in there and make sure that you're not leaving something back there that'll promote rust. Fender flares are kind of a divisive topic, especially certain styles. Now personally, I'm not a huge fan of the Bushwhacker or whatever brand they actually were, style ones that are on this Jeep, but they came with it. The fenders were already cut, so something's got to be there, and so I made them work. And, you know, once I got the Jeep lifted up a couple inches on a new set of springs and put the 31 tires on it, it proportioned out nicely. Also, mine's painted in truck bed liner, so it's not like I've got these layers out on the side and then this nice shiny preservation quality paint everywhere else. It works for the trail. In any case, hope that gives you some ideas, whether you decided, hey, you really do want this kind of look and you want to figure out a way to do it, or if, like me, you bought somebody else's project and now you've got to get it cleaned up a bit so that it works better. Either way, hope that helped you out. Thanks for joining us again today. We'll see you again next time, whenever that is. Has anyone seen my phone?